At 4:16 a.m., 200 miles off the Venezuelan coast, the Caribbean Sea was calm and silent, except for one thing: a thin white wake cutting across the dark water at 40 knots. A Venezuelan cartel boat, loaded with high-value cargo and guarded by armed crew members, was racing toward an extraction point. To the men on board, everything seemed perfect. The skies were clear. The sea was empty. The radar scans showed no threats. Their spotters on nearby islands sent updates saying the American Navy was nowhere near the area. They believed they were invisible. They believed they were safe. And they believed nothing could stop them from completing the route they had run a dozen times before. But they were wrong, because more than 30 miles away, an American MH-60R Seahawk helicopter had already locked onto the heat signature of the speeding boat. The crew watched the target through a grainy thermal screen as it left a long, bright trail across the water. They had been tracking this vessel for hours. They knew its speed. They knew its heading. And they knew what it was carrying. The cartel boat didn't know it yet, but its mission was already over. Something was about to happen. Something fast, precise, and unstoppable. And in the next few minutes, the entire operation would collapse in a flash of fire on the Caribbean Sea. For the cartel crew, this route was routine. Their boat, a modified high-speed fiberglass craft reinforced with lightweight plating, was designed to outrun nearly anything on the water. They had a twin-engine setup delivering over 2,500 horsepower. They carried jamming equipment. They even had heat reduction plates welded to the exhaust to fool basic sensors. Each crew member believed this mission was simple: get in, collect the shipment, and get out before sunrise. They had done this dozens of times. The men felt confident. They trusted their speed, their experience, and the early morning darkness. What they did not know was that U.S. surveillance aircraft had watched them leave the Venezuelan coastline hours earlier. What they did not know was that a Navy destroyer had already sent a helicopter to intercept them. And what they could not see was that the Seahawk's sensors were far more advanced than anything they had ever faced. The U.S. Navy helicopter, the MH-60R Romeo, was carrying an advanced mission load. But there was a problem the crew was hiding from command. The missile rails had been showing small warning codes for weeks. Salt water from the humid Caribbean air had crept deep inside the electrical contacts, and corrosion threatened to interfere with missile communication signals. The crew inspected everything before takeoff. They cleaned the rails. They ran system checks. But the warning lights came back on as soon as the helicopter lifted from the destroyer's deck. Still, the mission was too important to ignore. For 6 weeks, the U.S. had tracked a new smuggling route used by Venezuelan cartel groups to move illegal cargo into Central America. This boat was one of the primary carriers. If the Americans didn't stop it now, the shipment would disappear into a network of remote coves and drop-off points. The helicopter team accepted the risk. They flew into the darkness with a weapon that might not fire. The stakes were deadly simple. If the cartel boat escaped, millions of dollars of illegal cargo would reach smugglers along the coastline, strengthening the cartel's regional power. If the U.S. succeeded, a key supply chain would collapse overnight. The helicopter pilot understood this perfectly. He looked down at the glowing ocean below, took a steady breath, and prepared for the strike. The trap was set. The target was exposed, and the night was about to erupt. At 4:23 a.m., the MH-60R Romeo turned sharply south, descending from 2,000 feet to just above wave level. The pilot kept the helicopter low to avoid radar detection. The crew fought warm, wet Caribbean air that distorted the thermal image. Salt spray occasionally flickered across the camera lens. making the boat jump and blur on the screen. But slowly, the missile system gained a partial lock. The sensors struggled, but held on long enough to calculate distance and speed. Inside the cartel boat, the crew laughed and smoked cigarettes. They didn't see the helicopter. They didn't hear it. They thought they were just another moving dot in the dark sea. They had no idea the sky above them was watching. Minutes later, the helicopter's targeting laser activated. A thin beam shot downward, invisible to the naked eye. But the atmosphere was humid, and the ocean was reflective. The air shimmered and scattered the beam. The laser kept losing return percentage. The targeting computer flickered between lock and no lock. The Romeo's weapons officer frowned as he watched the data streaming across the screen. If the laser continued failing, the missile could miss, or worse, hit the wrong target. Inside the helicopter, tension began rising. Then another problem appeared. The missile rails flashed amber and red warnings. The corrosive salt damage was interfering with the missile's digital handshake. Without a proper handshake, the missile could misfire. It could drop without igniting. It could veer off course. The crew knew that launching from a compromised rail was dangerous. They considered aborting. They considered pulling away and letting a ship-based asset engage instead. But the cartel boat was pulling out of range. They had minutes left, maybe less. The U.S. crew initiated a final diagnostic run. The missile's systems sent thousands of microsignals through the interpretation unit. The software ran Byzantine fault tolerance to ensure that if any signal was corrupted, the system would detect it. Slowly, the rail's status changed. The warnings faded. The missile gave a ready tone. The crew exhaled. Now, the only remaining obstacle was the weather. The cartel boat suddenly turned west, creating a sharp change in its wake pattern. It was a maneuver designed to break visual tracking, but it didn't matter. The helicopter adjusted altitude. The crew recalibrated the camera angles. The thermal sensors followed the heat signature. Even when the boat fired thermal flares into the water, trying to confuse sensors, the Romeo held the lock. The helicopter's flight computers stabilized the aircraft despite side winds, and the camera operator kept a steady aim on the engine block. The crew was trained for moments like this. And then, the laser return signal dropped to almost zero. Ocean spray rose in sheets, covering the water with a shimmering mirror. The helicopter sensors nearly lost the target. The missile lock flickered again. The weapons officer clenched his teeth. If the lock broke now, the entire mission could fail. Weather, humidity, and ocean glare all worked together to blind the targeting system. This was the moment where everything could fall apart. But just as the crew prepared to abort, the laser suddenly stabilized. The return signal jumped back to full strength. The missile rail lit green. The firing solution became perfect. The pilot positioned the helicopter for the shot. The nose pointed straight at the speeding boat. The weapons officer confirmed lock. The moment of truth had arrived. Before we move into the strike itself, make sure you subscribe. These deep military breakdowns take a lot of time to create, and your support helps the channel reach more people. Thank you. At 4:28 a.m., the helicopter hovered low, its rotors beating hard against the humid Caribbean air. The thermal camera zoomed in on the cartel boat's engine block. The crew saw the white-hot glow of the exhaust system. The weapons officer steadied his hand on the controls. Everything was ready. The command was given. The missile dropped from the rail, ignited, and shot downward in a perfect arc. The white trail cut through the night. On the cartel boat, one of the crew members finally heard the faint whistle. He looked up, confused. He shouted. But by the time he spoke, the missile was already there. It hit the engine block with a flash of white light. The rear of the boat shattered instantly. A fireball erupted upward, lighting the sea as bright as dawn. The force ripped through the hull. The fiberglass vaporized. Water rushed in. Pieces of metal sprayed across the surface like shrapnel. The helicopter's sensors recorded everything. The strike lasted less than a second, but its impact would last far longer. The explosion reached over 200 psi. The heat exceeded 1,000 degrees. The blast radius tore the boat apart. Flames spread across floating debris. Within seconds, all 3 engines were gone. The vessel folded in on itself like a collapsing shell. A plume of smoke drifted across the water. The cartel boat had ceased to exist. The helicopter circled above the debris field. The thermal bloom slowly faded. The ocean glowed with scattered hot fragments. Smoke drifted across the waves. Nothing remained of the cartel boat except pieces of burning fiberglass and oil spreading across the water's surface. The mission was complete. Hours later, U.S. command confirmed that the destroyed vessel was responsible for multiple smuggling routes. The interdiction shut down a major supply line and disrupted the cartel's operations across the Caribbean. Allied intelligence services praised the strike. Regional navies increased patrol coordination. The entire network felt the shock. The strike proved something important. Technology matters. Training matters. And even in perfect conditions, one small failure, like missile rail corrosion, can change everything. But on that night, precision and discipline won. So, what do you think? Should the U.S. expand helicopter interdiction missions across the Caribbean? And should other nations adopt similar tactics? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying these deep cinematic breakdowns, don't forget to subscribe.